next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Inside joke for those that know, they know. Operation GLADIO, part 11. We're going to be talking about Iran-Contra. The colonel is down there in the green room waiting. And let me just tell you guys, I'm pumped. I'm pumped about this show for a couple reasons. A, this is coming off right of the heels after doing GART 4. And I was talking about the colonel about this. I told her the name that I heard being brought up to me more than anybody out there was Colonel Towner. And I hear it I hear it and see it on social media. I hear about the reception of her in other events. You know what this tells me? That this woman is phenomenal. The information is just outstanding, and people are starting to hear it, and it is spreading. And the perfect way to make people understand the truth of all these world events over the last couple decades, what it's for and how to recognize it now, is to put them in the direction of Operation GLADIO. So before I bring on the colonel and we get into Iran-Contra, and I'll tell you, I think I've shared this with the colonel, some of you may know, but there's a character that comes out in Iran-Contra, Marine by the name of Oliver North. And when we get into this, I'll explain to you guys how Alpha knows this man in a very interesting way. So before we do that, let's get to 2 commercials, and all these links are down in the description. I'll see you guys in just a few.
Are you worried about the effects that higher inflation rates will have on your investments? Are you trying to secure your retirement savings against losses, but you notice that inflation is a hot topic these days? But how dangerous are low inflation rates on your retirement savings? An inflation rate of 2% may not seem like much, but it means that prices will just about quintuple over the lifetime of the average American. And 4% average inflation rate means that something that costs $1 when they're born will cost $23 when they die. That demonstrates the danger of even low inflation rates. So when it comes to gold and inflation rates, many investors want to know whether inflation rates have an effect on gold prices. What history indicates is that over the long term, increased inflation should lead to correspondingly higher gold prices. From September 1971 to August 2020, gold grew 7.5 times as much as inflation. Not only can an investment in physical gold help protect your assets against the damage done by inflation, it can also help grow the value of your retirement portfolio over the long term. If you're looking to protect your retirement assets, why wait until stock markets crash and gold begins to rise in price?
I'm excited to announce we're having a huge MyPillow spring sale, and here's a few examples. Buy one of our MyPillow 2.0s, you get another MyPillow 2.0 absolutely free. Made with cooling technology, the best pillow ever just got even better. And this just in, 9 brand new colors and styles of our Percale bed sheets. They're made with the finest long staple cotton, and now you can save 50% or more. That's as low as $24.98. And for the first time this year, I'm bringing you our My Slippers and Sandals for as low as $25 a pair. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get your MyPillow 2.0s. Buy one, get one free. Percale sheets as low as $24.98. My Slippers and Sandals as low as $25 a pair. And for a limited time, when you order $75 or more, your entire order ships absolutely free.
Absolutely free. It'll ship. That is mypillow.com/alpha, or just go to the website, enter promo code alpha, alphalikesgold.com. All of our sponsors, affiliates, and partnerships are down in the link below, including the prior 10 episodes that I did with the Colonel. So let me bring on the woman you guys really want to hear from tonight. Colonel Towner, how you doing, ma'am?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited about this. I'm motivated because I was with my people, and that gets you going again. And this is Operation Gladio. It's Wednesday. I'm pumped up.
And you have to tell everybody that the whole, well, at least several members of the GART that was with you, because I wasn't able to make it to Dallas, came to Florida for their movie premiere of a movie for everyone to share with their normies, friends on what's going on in the world, which was premiered at the GART that you went to. They came to Florida and did a second premiere here, and I got to meet several of the people, plus the producer of the movie. And so they left you and they came to see me.
They did, and just so people know, for those that were at GART 4 and in Dallas, I saw that movie for the first time with the audience. So I'm watching, I'm like, oh man, this is good, this is awesome. And then
what did they talk about?
They talked about a lot of good stuff, and all of a sudden it's Operation Gladio, and I'm like, what? What? It's just. It was a pleasant surprise because one, I respect my peers at Badlands, even though we don't always agree on everything. I recognize the hard work that everybody has, and to see something like that make a movie, and I know how important that movie was, to the director and John, and to see them incorporate that. This tells me the level of understanding and recognition of this subject matter and how important it is to the truth and to this.
Made the movie.
You made the movie. I'm just the voice.
We made the movie. I would have never gotten that visibility without you, Alpha.
Well, it's much appreciated, and then that turn goes full circle because I'm only here because there's an audience that's willing to listen and watch. So huge team effort to all the truth seekers that are in the live chat right now on the different platforms. So shout out to the people on X, shout out to the people on Rumble. We are live. So those Rumble rants, if you guys shoot them out there, 99.9% chance they will make it to the screen as long as there's nothing too vulgar for Alpha, which means you really have to go far for me to say I'm not doing that. But Colonel,
and this is our first live show.
It is pretty freaking cool. There's so much that has unfolded in these last couple of days. There's just a lot. I haven't shared this publicly yet. No, it'd take a lot, so I'm not going to go into the details. I'll probably do a show later. But I had this great weekend with all these great people. And then on the way home, obviously I'm a quad-S, so I'm used to the TSA stuff that I got to go through. But man, they upped it on me, and they incorporated a new thing that just really upset me. I was just like, you guys are too much. But then I was just like, you know what? Let's focus on the good things. I had a woman that was there, gave me a little gold coin from, a little Canada gold coin. I mean, thing's valuable. I had another gentleman that gave me a silver dollar, a silver coin that has Liberty on it. I have some other stuff, but it have the green screen up, so I can't show it. So I'll show them through the other shows. But the love and the reception,
you deserve it.
I don't want to say overwhelming, because overwhelming seems like a bad thing, but and I don't know if actually, I think we've talked. I think you may know what I'm talking about here. In this fight and with everything that's going on, we may not be in the service no more, but we always represent the service. That's our mentality. And so my job is doesn't matter what the government's doing to me, doesn't matter what my fight is. It's, hey, we got to push forward, overcome, adapt and overcome, and get the fight out there. But in this fight, sometimes you feel alone sometimes. And And sometimes things happen and you hear things, and sometimes you're just like, man, well, why am I putting myself through this? And then you meet a bunch of good people and you're reminded of, this is why I'm in the fight. This is why I get to have conversations with amazing people like you, Colonel. And it's just, I am just stoked. I am on fire right now to keep pushing this fight forward. So Iran-Contra, we're going to get into it. I'm sure there's a gentleman, Ollie, that's going to pop up sometime in this conversation. And,
Yes.
and when he does, I'll let you guys know how
You know him?
how I know him. Yes.
Okay. So let's start off. This is a quote. The common ingredients of the Iran and Contra policies were secrecy, deception, disdain for the law. The United States simultaneously pursued two contradictory foreign policies, a public one and a secret one. And I chose that quote because it didn't even have an attribution, or I would tell you who wrote it. But I chose that because in the exploration of GLADIO, that kind of summarizes what I find each and every time. They have a public version of what they're doing, and they have a secret version of what they're doing. So immediately, now that we wear GLADIO glasses, I begin to see those types of things when you look back over historical events. That held true when I started digging into the Iran-Contra affair as well. So technically, it went on from about 1984 to 1987. But there's a lot of history that we're going to unpack tonight that I think people will find interesting, that led us up to the place where it actually occurred. So basically, it's two separate covert operations that was going on simultaneously, that they purposely intertwined, even though they were distinctly different and supposedly being done for different objectives. But when you're dealing with the CIA, everything starts getting fuzzy. So under the management of a few individuals, both the Iran and the Contra policies intersected at certain important points that created, obviously, the Iran-Contra affair. The first covert policy initiative was the continued support of the CIA to back the anti-government Contras against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. After the Congress had cut off its funding in two different Bolin amendments, because as soon as they passed the first one, the CIA started subverting it, and they had to pass a second one. The second covert policy initiative was the selling of arms to Iran in exchange for the release of American hostages held in Lebanon. It was said that Iran had connections to what was happening in Lebanon, and therefore could be bribed to flex their muscle to get the US citizens that were being held hostage released. The two policies intersected when profits from the arms sale in Iran were going to be used to support the Nicaraguan Contras, because they were forbidden to spend appropriated dollars on the Contras. So their workaround was they were going to find third-party cutouts and use private funding to do that with. Keep in mind, because I'm going to try to paint the picture of what was going on back then. In 1983, the Marine barracks was blown up in Lebanon. There were kidnappings almost on a daily basis in Lebanon. And many people were making the case that, just as they do today, that Iran was behind all of it. When you actually dig in, and we won't have time for that tonight, but when you dig into the Lebanon issue, that's a whole nother show. And you quickly find out, because of the involvement of the PLO and Israel, and the instigation that went on in Lebanon behind the scenes to get people who had gotten along for a century or so, Christians and Muslims living in the same country, Lebanon. It was flourishing. It was the Paris of the Middle East, very metropolitan, very well-traveled. And then you have this agitation starting, just like we've seen in every Operation Gladio. So you have Christians being set up, you have Muslims being set up to drive them apart and to basically break apart Lebanon. And a lot of the same players come up. So I just wanted to set that background for you so you can recall some of the turmoil that was going on in Lebanon, the taking of hostages. They hijacked an airplane. So that's kind of what's going on. And as they take more and more hostages, the energy level goes up to try to do something about it. So
now, real quick to that, because I wanted to make sure I brushed myself up on this before we did the show, and I was reading something, I was just like, I want to make sure I'm understanding this right, given what's going on in our world right now as we speak. Was Israel was a part of facilitating the payment and the hostages and all that with I was like,
we're going to get to that.
Okay, because I was just like, man, talk about timing. All right, please continue, Colonel.
Yes, yes. That's why, Alpha, I just can't tell you, the more we do this research, the more it applies to everything that's going on today. Everything. That's why Putin sat down with Tucker and gave the world was watching while he gave a history lesson. We have to understand history or we can't understand what's going on today, which is why I get so excited about this show. Okay, so a little bit about the NSC, the National Security Council, and the CIA. Both of them were created at the same time back in the 1940s. Most people understand, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but 1947, the National Security Act basically created the National Security Council and the CIA. It's important for this conversation to understand that the National Security Council was founded to facilitate presidential decision-making, but it's evolved into something completely different. It has basically became a mini State Department under the executive office of the presidency because they have desk like the State Department. They'll have like an Israeli desk. They'll have like a Middle East desk. They'll have like a Southwest Asia or a Asian desk. And that was not the envisionment of it when it was originally created, nor was it originally created to do covert operations, which it has definitely taken under the umbrella of the National Security Council to conduct its own covert operations, even outside of the CIA. So during the Eisenhower administration in the mid-1950s, the NSC became a virtual like aperture, if you will, of the presidency. They basically act as a special assistant to the president. And it, in many ways, it's almost, for people that are in the military, it's like an ad-von team of the State Department. A lot of people will make the argument that it was put kind of a put off of the State Department, like it was usurping their authority. That is absolutely not true. It's like embedding the State Department in a super capacity right next to the president. So it'd be like having a mini Pentagon next in the White House or executive branch right next to the president. You know what I mean?
Well,
that's not a bad thing. That's almost too good of a thing. So
here's a photo from, this is March 21st of 2003, that shows President George W. Bush during the National Security Council meeting with the White House Situation Room. And you could see the people that are in there. So just to give people how, really, when you say the president's right there, the president's right there.
And so it kind of gives them a, like I said, among equals in the other departments, it gives them, especially if they have their people in there, which they generally do, because where else are you going to staff the National Security Council outside of like the diplomatic corps that's actually lived in these places and been there and done that. So there's like this very strange, and a lot of them are prior military too. So it's kind of like a super majority kind of presence there. And especially when they began running covert operations out of there, it gives them like a planning cell that most people don't even understand how it works. So when Reagan takes over, they basically become even further professionalized, where they're up to an actual staff of 45, but it balloons up to 200 people in the National Security Council. So you can tell we're not going to be doing the Jimmy Carter foreign policy. And let's see, Robert McFarlane was the guy that was in originally at the beginning of the Iran-Contra period, and then he's replaced by John Poindexter. Now, I do want to say real quick that John Poindexter is military, and at the time, he is an admiral. And we came across John Poindexter in one of our prior videos where we talked about him owning that St. Hubris hunting ranch down in Texas.
Yes.
Yes, this is the same John Poindexter where Justice Scalia gets murdered on John Poindexter's ranch. Okay, so just keep that in mind. This is the same John Poindexter we're talking about. So Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North is the Deputy Director of Political Military Affairs for the NSC staff and was deeply involved in both the Iran-Contra, the Iran affair, and the Contra affair. Like the NSC, the CIA evolved with different president administrations. Under Eisenhower, the 1955 NSC directive outlined the spectrum of CIA covert operations in an effort to turn the CIA into a virtual Cold War machine against communism. And we know as part of Operation Gladio, we keep hearing this anti-communist mantra that they use to justify every regime change, every attack on a foreign government. They did it under the guise of being anti-communist, even though the country was not communist at all. And that's what you're going to find with Nicaragua. Just about every book you pick up, if they are touting the party line, they will tell you, oh, it was a Marxist-Leninist regime. Oh, it was trending towards communism. But when you actually go down and look at the actual documents of what was signed, and we'll get into that, that is not the case. So basically, the quote from Eisenhower was that the CIA was to create and exploit troublesome problems for international communism, reduce international communist control over any areas of the world, and develop underground resistance and facilitate covert and guerrilla operations. Now, that thing needs to be put on my wall, because he is describing, this is a quote from Eisenhower, and he's describing Operation Gladio, right? Underground resistance, covert, guerrilla operations. That's Gladio. And Eisenhower is telling you that's why they created the CIA. I was just blown away by that.
It's the level of planning. I'm going to look for, I know where I can find it. When I was looking for the picture with Oliver North, I came across another picture and I was like, you know, when you see something, your jaw drops. Because at the time that we took this pictures back during my cop days, it was a weird thing they had set up out here in Southern California, but it was just weird. When I came across it, I was like, oh my God, I know who that is. Like, I know who the artist representation of this person is. I'll look for it. And if we have time at the end of the show, I'll bring it up.
So The CIA director during the Reagan administration, as we tell the story, is William Casey. And he has a very long history of CIA operations in all of this Operation Gladio storyline. So, hello. The fact that he's in charge during this was not a surprise. So let's talk first. So we got to talk. We talked a little bit about Lebanon. We're going to talk a little bit about Nicaragua. And then we will move to Iran. And I want to tell you a little bit about the back history so you can understand this was not any of these countries' first dance with the regime change efforts of the United States government. As a matter of fact, in Nicaragua, it goes back to the late 1800s, even before Operation Gladio. We were messed up in Nicaragua repeatedly. This story, I tried to limit it, but I do want to tell you that the first time, I did do a thread on it on X if you want to go find it. It should be pinned on my profile, that you had a very well-loved, Zelaya was his name, Nicaraguan president that was basically very similar to Mosaddegh, who was the guy we overthrew in Iran. That's kind of the irony of it. They were very freedom-loving. They were very education-minded. They were very secular in their approach to government, but they were also nationalist, and they did not want the United States involved in their affairs. And I don't know how many people know that Nicaragua was the original location, as voted on by Congress, to have the Atlantic Pacific Canal. So they did a charter company in Congress to build a Nicaraguan canal. But there was some people in France that owned some property that wanted the canal in Panama. But Panama was a part of Colombia. It wasn't even its own country. It was like a suburb of Colombia. So they wanted to offload this. They ran out of money, and they wanted to offload this property that was now worthless because the United States decided to build the canal in Nicaragua. So the Sullivan and Cromwell, where Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles worked before they came into the government and ran the CIA and the State Department for Eisenhower, went to work to basically destroy Nicaragua and their chance of having the canal. And then you have this, most people know about the story about Smedley Butler and supposedly the coup on FDR. And he was a Marine two-star at the time when he supposedly saved FDR and told about this coup. Well, when he was a major, he basically facilitated the stealing of Panama from Colombia. He's the guy leading and was taking direction from a civilian to go ashore and basically protect the bad guys, and allowed the syndicate to steal the Panama from Colombia. And the U.S. immediately recognized the new fake pandemonium government. And then immediately, of course, the U.S. goes and buys this property from this Cromwell group over in Paris. So they made bank on all of this. And then, of course, Cromwell, he was paid in like 1905. I mean, this was like very early on, $800,000.
Oh my God.
$800,000 was his payoff. That's the international syndicate at work. So this is the history. So Nicaraguan basically gets robbed. There's another coup later on with the United Fruit group of people. I mean, so this is a long story of destabilization in Nicaragua. Okay, so let's pick it up there.
Okay, and just real quick, is this the thread that you're talking about right here?
I can't see it.
It starts off with which path to Persia, options for new American strategy toward
Actually, it's
Iran.
about the stamp. No, it's about the stamp. It's the label of it is how did the stamp determine their future or something like that. It had something to do with the stamp, because what they did was Cromwell paid a company in New York that was doing a project for Nicaragua. They were doing some like special printed touristy stamps to feature a volcano on one of them. And there were 2 volcanic eruptions in the Caribbean that year. And then they took that story with that stamp and mailed that stamped letter to every senator and said, Nicaragua has a volcano that's going to destroy the Panama, or the canal, not Panama Canal, the canal that you have approved. You need to go to Panama. They don't have any volcanoes. The volcano was over 100 miles away from where the proposed canal was, and they had already started work on it, and they defunded it and funded the Panama Canal as a result of that. And that was all Cromwell's work. These people are crazy. So the U.S., obviously, based on what I just said, has long intervened on the Nicaraguan affairs, aiming to keep its political development friendly and aligned to the U.S. interest. As early as 1912, the U.S. has utilized military forces to quell rebellions against American-approved leaders or to help overthrow unwanted regimes. This went back, as I said, to President Zelaya with the use of the U.S. Marines. There was another guy by the name of Augusto Cesar Sandino. And Sandino is where they get the word Sandinista. When Augusto Sandino was a very small boy, he watched Major Smedley Butler's Marines drag the body of the now murdered Zelaya down the street to a cemetery. And that made such an impression on this little boy that he grew up and had sworn a duty to his country that he was never going to let foreigners come in and do that to their country again, because it was such a disgrace and people just loved Zelaya. So therefore, when the U.S. trained head of the Nicaraguan National Guard happened to be a guy by the name of Somoza Garcia. He took power in 1936, and the U.S. made no move to protect the current administration under Augusto Cesar Sandino. So Sandino was murdered by Somoza, and it marked the beginning of what they refer to in Nicaragua as the Somoza dynasty that lasted 43 years of tyranny. And I mean, he just unleashed holy hell on everybody. So in 1961, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, named after Sandino, was created in opposition to the Somoza dynasty. The Sandinistas saw themselves as a liberal Democrat nationalistic state. The US and most ignorant people will tell you that they were communist or pro-Russia. They were, or Soviet Union. They were not. They did, however, having watched all of their neighbors around the same time, because keep in mind, we went through the timeline of the 1950s and 60s and how many governments were overthrown by the U.S. in South America and Latin America and all over the world, quite frankly, because they did the Congo in 60. This is a rolling trend. The Sandinistas were smart enough to know we're not going to get in bed with the U.S. only. We do want to have a good relationship with them, but we are also opening a dialogue with the USSR and Cuba. And that was a non-starter for the US. They didn't want anybody outside of their paradigm having any influence over anybody in Latin America. So that kind of spelt the doom before it even started. But it was a good hedging your bet thing because they had the last time they did this in Nicaragua, they have a harbor and they had blockaded the harbor. And so they knew that if they were good with the Soviet Union and with Cuba, that they would come to the rescue, right? If they got caught between this again. So they were kind of just hedging their bets.
Real quick, let me jump in because we got a huge rumble rant that came from Boom Diggity. Love this series. Thank you, Alpha and Colonel Towner-Watkins, for bringing all the sauce we need to decipher this world we are just beginning to understand. Boom Diggity, thank you very much for that huge rumble rant. Please go ahead, Colonel.
Okay. The Sandinistas worked to create and consolidate their power in the context of the Cold War era, where freedom, nationalistic movements, and uprisings were gaining worldwide popularity. In 1967, Anastasio Somoza, the son of the president, became president. And that's why they call it a dynasty, because it was kind of just perpetuating down through this family. He became notorious in Nicaragua for suppressing opposition, focusing on enrichment of the elite and himself, you know, kind of like an actual communist or a fascist, as opposed to the Sandinistas, who were not like that at all. In 1972, when an earthquake struck Managua, the capital of Nicaragua, Somoza exercised emergency powers to address the earthquake, but he actually did it to confiscate all of the international aid that was being sent, and he embezzled it and did not give it to the Nicaraguans. This event basically spelled the end of his administration, because it woke up the local businesses, because he turned around and levied a tax on the businesses to make up for the money he had just stolen. So he managed in one fell swoop to piss everybody off.
Kind of like the Bidens.
Huh?
Kind of like the Bidens.
Yeah. Yeah. So in 1974, the Sandinistas kidnapped several Nicaraguan elites at a Christmas party. Basically, what they did is they have like this place that they had these big fancy parties, and they came in and basically stormed it and held them all hostage. And Somoza responded to the affair by declaring a state of siege, which spiraled into a series of human rights violations and guerrilla attacks on the commoners. In response, the U.S., being hypersensitive to the threat of communism, and in conjunction with trends of other countries basically stifling human rights, they played this to their advantage and began paying attention to Nicaragua for the first time since this guy had come to power, and he had been violating everybody's human rights the entire time. I think because they're dealing drugs at this time through Nicaragua, I think for the first time, they realized how bad the situation was. So it got moved up on the list of potential good guys overthrowing the CIA guys. And so people started paying attention. But right at that time, Jimmy Carter gets elected. And
Colonel, let me bring up this. So this is Nicaragua. You guys, if you want to stick, you see Costa Rica, you see Honduras. So all this is going, we're not talking like the huge Russia or like Iran. Like this place is, little in perspective to this other stuff. And yet it's hard to understand this level of corruption taking place right under the noses of the local populace, given like everybody's squished into this little country, and yet this is all taking place.
These are drug trafficking avenues. They appear to be negligible in comparison, but they are vital after they lost Cuba for drug trades. This is where the CIA actually makes bank. Every country on that trail from South America, because now you have to go back and put some of our previous shows where we talked about the drug trade moving around from Vietnam to Afghanistan, and then to South America. So they're growing heroin now in South America, right? So they have got to they're bringing massive amounts of drugs in through Panama after they lost Cuba. And so instead of being able to ship them to Cuba and directly into Florida or New York right off the coast, they're having to come in through South America or Central America and then drive them up through Mexico. That's why it was not until that shift in the production and the loss of Cuba that you see the significance of quote unquote cartels in Mexico get created. And many of those were created and have direct access to the CIA. They set up that entire network. And that's why they were literally willing to go to war with the Soviet Union over Cuba. They wanted Cuba back that bad because it was so much cheaper to do it through Cuba.
You just gave me goosebumps. Literally, I got goosebumps right now because as you were explaining this and why the cartels came, I started thinking, so we've heard about the Darien Gap. We hear about some of these other routes that they're using for human trafficking. So these are not new routes. These are routes that were established back then. And now they're just saying, hey, we can utilize these same things for human trafficking. So holy smokes. Yeah. So the very routes of human trafficking coming into this country have to do with the CIA and everybody else that was part of Operation GLADIO all the way back. And man, wow.
All the way back.
Wow.
So anyway, we also are just now getting out of Vietnam, right? So we've lost Vietnam, and that makes all of this bubble up to the top because they have to have new routes for production. So President Carter, instead of basically going to war, which was never his first option, nor allowing the CIA to do their thing, he immediately cuts off aid to the Nicaraguan government until the Somoza guy cleans up his act and stops the human rights violation. Well, what do you know? Somoza responds by lifting the state of siege. He gets rid of the mandate after the volcano and basically is trying to get things back to normal so he can get his U.S. aid back. So this was met by the Sandinistas reinitiating and expanding their attacks on the Somoza government. So keep in mind, the business elites that had been bought off by the American people doing business in Nicaragua and the railroads and United Fruit and all of those companies have paid off not only all of the government, but they've made a class of people that are reliant on them that are their patsies. So there's this business elite that have their allegiance to the U.S. and not to Nicaragua. So the Sandinistas, in July 1979, the Sandinistas uprising culminated in them gaining full power of Nicaragua. The Sandinistas' first move as new political leaders was to declare a state of emergency, take their land back from United Fruit and all of these other people that had gobbled up all of their land. So they could let people go back to coffee farming and stuff like that. So they could have independently wealthy middle class and not just these elite business owners. And obviously that pissed off all of the old dynasty families that had been bought off. They nationalized all of their banks, which pissed off everybody in New York. They nationalized their mines, which pissed off everybody in London, and their transit system. They abolished all of the old courts and wanted to rewrite the Constitution that basically set them up as a democracy where they had elections and people could pick their own leaders and not have any of the royal families like the Somozas anymore. And they wanted to move the state to basically a liberal democracy that favored the lower class people. President Carter immediately sent $99 million in aid to them in an attempt to keep the regime favorable to the U.S. But again, I was telling you, they feathered both sides of their bed. At the same time, they're talking to Cuba because they don't trust the US and they had no reason to trust us. And they also start working with the Soviet Union, which they reached a deal with them in 1980 for economic trade agreements and stuff like that. So let's see.
Well, you gather that spot. We got another huge rumble rant that came in from Breadmaker62. I will back that rant. Thank you both so much. Shout out again to Boom Diggity and Breadmaker62.
Awesome. So it's mid 1980 when Jose Cardenal and Enrique Bermeze founded what would become the Nicaraguan Democratic Force, or FDN, which ends up being what we now call the Contras. So as soon as the country gets stabilized and they're on the democratic path, up comes a Operation GLADIO, CIA funded, backed, financially backed entity to ensure that they maintain control over Nicaragua. So the Contras found support among the population that was disaffected by the Sandinista policies, which basically amounts to the elite, right? So you have, I can't say this often enough. You have a truly fascist government that has existed for over 4 decades, that has destroyed this country, that has been funded by a couple of companies that wanted to do business there from the United States. And then you have this rebellion, a revolution there to bring democracy to the country. They call the rebellion that wanted to bring democracy to the country communist, and they call the guys that had kept them enslaved for the last 40 years to a higher power. We're now going to support them through the CIA. Just, I want you to grapple with that, because that's at the heart of Operation GLADIO. This is repeated often. So the Argentinian government was the first to begin supporting the Contras. This is very important from a GLADIO perspective, because let me remind you, Argentina at the time has a GLADIO installed president there as well. And he's the guy that was imprisoning priests. This is where the current Pope was, the Archbishop. And Argentina is also the government that was so disgusting. I can't even think of a word to describe it. They drugged the people. They killed over 100,000 people. They killed so many people that they were drugging them, putting in the back of a cargo plane, taking off, flying out over the ocean, and putting them out the back of the plane because they didn't have room to bury them anymore. This is the first country that supports the Contras that the CIA is going to be supporting, and not the Democrat, the government that wants to have a democratic country. Okay.
The consistencies here are just so crazy. And granted, it would take other shows, but when you look at Hezbollah and you look at Hamas and you look at ISIS, it's like, Jesus, man, like they just never changed the playbook.
No. So let's see. They directly oversaw the Contras training the military forces and chose the Contras leadership, whereas the U.S. took the role of supplying the money and the arms. So you have these Contras, which will eventually be trained not only just in Argentina, but Costa Rica, who's under, we'll talk about him in a minute, but Costa Rica also sets up militant, and Honduras too, militant GLADIO style training camps to train these Contra people. This is like all out war here. You've got Costa Rica, you've got Honduras, and you've got Argentina. And if you still have that map up, you can show everybody where they're at. This is going to be a no holds bar attack on the fledgling democracy that Nicaragua wants to be.
There it is right there.
So show them Honduras And
Yeah. So if you're,
Argentina,
yeah, if you're looking up at this map, you guys, at the very, very top, you'll see Honduras, you'll see El Salvador is just peeking off. If you're looking at, you know, if you make it northeast west or northeast southwest map, you'll see where it says the Gulf Fonseca. You'll see the El Salvador. You'll see Costa Rica at the very bottom of it. Pacific Ocean is to the left. The Caribbean Sea's to the right. You see Volcano Row. That's right there next to Leon and Puerto Sandino. But this is what you guys have.
yeah. So that's setting up the clear text of this is like saying the Contras used their GLADIO Condor training sites in all of these neighboring countries for the CIA to train them.
I'm going to bring up two other. I'm not sure they're relevant now, but I just want to show them to you, Colonel. So this way, if they're relevant later, I can bring them up. But I also have this one that talks about the Iran-Contra scandal. And then I also have this one that kind of breaks down some things to talk about.
Okay.
Just in case you want.
Okay. So worried that the Contras were a continuation of the Somoza regime because of their use of brutal tactics against non-combatants and their alleged human rights abuses, which was very true. Once it became clear that Washington and the Sandinista government would not be isolated to just a U.S. position, President Carter authorized the CIA to support a resistance force in Nicaragua, including propaganda efforts, but not including armed action. So basically, he said that because they were not going to be on the sole dime of the United States and that they were playing their options, that the CIA could propagandize them, but could not do any of the stuff they were already doing, like arming them. It appears this was only because the CIA continually described the Sandinista government as communist when they were not. The Sandinistas supported rebels in El Salvador because El Salvador at the time was also going through their own basic revolution from a CIA-installed dictator there as well. So Sandinistas, they're just pissing everybody off that's in the CIA, right? They're screwing up their efforts in El Salvador. They screwed up their efforts in Nicaragua. They're talking to the bad guys, the communists, to hedge their bet because they know the U.S. is going to stab them in the back. So the El Salvador thing was beginning in the 1980s and continued for the next 10 years. So this, again, was problematic for the CIA because they were using El Salvador and Nicaragua for drug trafficking, and they didn't want it interfered with, and the Sandinistas was interfering with it. So Sandinista support for the Salvadorian rebels had a profound impact on the U.S. and Nicaragua relations throughout the entire 80s. In January 20th, 1981, which is when Reagan takes office. So now Jimmy Carter, in his non-intervention, non-military approach to things, even though the CIA was ignoring him, those days are gone. We got the cowboys in now. So he gets inaugurated and he goes right to work. He quickly cuts off U.S. aid to the Sandinista government because they're communists. And he also voiced his disapproval of their support of the Salvadorian rebels. And in response, the Sandinistas consolidated power and expanded arrests of perceived dissidents, like their elite spies, under the belief that the U.S. was going to invade. I don't know why they would think that. On December 1st, 1981, Reagan signed an order that allowed the CIA to support the Contras with arms, equipment, and money. This order was implemented in conjunction with an overall strengthening of the U.S. and Central America and the belief that the covert activities are the most effective way to put pressure on a regime. It sure is. This shift of foreign policy away from Carter's non-intervention culminated in June 1982 when Reagan called for supporting democratization everywhere. not really, because none of this is about democracy. This is not a joke. It was at this point that the goal of the covert operations in Nicaragua shifted away from one of simply interdicting arms that were coming into the country to one that was supporting a regime change in government. Iran-Contra historian Theodore Draper, among others, argued that this was the real goal all along, because he probably knew all about Operation Gladio. This helped popularize the foreign policy changes of the Reagan administration pertaining to propaganda. So what Reagan administration starts doing is they implement a huge propaganda campaign in the United States with media initiatives that were implemented to sway public opinion for congressional pressure. In January of 1983, National Security Decision Directive was signed, entitled, quote, Management of Public Diplomacy Relative to National Security, unquote, institutionalizing public diplomacy, which is basically propaganda. In effect, it was a special planning group within the NSC to coordinate public diplomacy campaigns. This group was America's first peacetime propaganda ministry. Every administration tries to influence public opinion, but not until Reagan was it so institutionalized. Another use of white propaganda. It was described as actually putting out truth, straight information, and not deception by the State Department. So why would you need to do that? Because we already can get the truth.
And they always use the word peace in these clubs. Let me interrupt you real quick, because as you were talking about the Nicaragua stuff, I started looking for all these things while you're speaking, and I came across this newspaper. I'm going to bring it up on the screen so everybody can see. It's the San Diego Tribune. This is dated Tuesday, October 7th, 1986. And in this article, there's a section titled "Contra Plane Down, Americans on Board." And I will read this to you guys. Let me just zoom in a little bit because my eyes aren't that good. Leftist claim survivor called himself advisor by the Associated Press. Nicaragua's leftist government claimed a survivor from a downed rebel supply plane identified himself as a U.S. military advisor based in El Salvador and said the 3 dead crew members were Americans. Presidential Press Secretary Manuel Espinosa said today that poor visibility prevented helicopters from reaching the crash site in heavy jungle about 35 miles north of Costa Rica and 91 miles southeast of Managua. He said the survivor identified himself as Eugene Haffendorf, 35, still was at the crash scene but would be brought to Managua as soon as possible. Relatives in Wisconsin later said the man's name was Eugene Hansenfuss, 45, of Marinette. In Washington, Secretary of State George Shultz said the plane had been hired by private Americans who have no connection to the U.S. government.
That's a lie. We'll get to that, but that's a lie.
Plane crashes. I was just like, Colonel tells us about this plane crashes. The dude saying he's an advisor. And if you think I'm going to buy off on, really, really cloudy skies prevented us from getting helicopters over there.
Well,
right.
Actually, they were carrying, that is one of the Contra's airplanes that the CIA was using. And it did have military on board, and it was shot down by the actual government of Nicaragua, the Sandinistas. It was an embarrassment. And it also allowed the Sandinistas to describe to the world what was actually going on there, even though the U.S. was denying it was, because all of this is covert. So the U.S. is not even being told what their tax dollars are being used for. So, let's see where we're at. This group, this propaganda group, reported directly to the NSC despite being housed in the State Department. And that's where I go back to what I said earlier about the fact that the NSC is not separate from the State Department. It's all just one big happy family. Both committees utilized a variety of media propaganda and control efforts a 14-page memorandum that was dated March 20th, 1985, from Lieutenant Colonel North to the National Security Advisor McFarland, explained that over 80 publicity stunts to influence public and congressional opinion before the upcoming Contra aid votes. The publicity diplomacy officials also leaked select pieces of information that they wanted to make public to journalists who favored Reagan. Strategic leaking and declassification of documents allowed the executive branch to manage the public perception of American efforts in South America, just like they do today. Despite all of the propaganda efforts, a series of high-profile articles began to divide the executive branch and legislature over Nicaragua and the Contra support. In 1982, the CIA gained a more prominent role in the training and funding of Contras. This attracted the attention of Newsweek, whose cover story in November 1982 was entitled "America's Secret War, Nicaragua." The story outlined America's efforts to undermine the Sandinista government and prompted a heated editorial response by the Boston Globe. This response sparked Massachusetts' Edward Bolin to lend a congressional effort to end all funding to Nicaraguan efforts. The first congressional legislation aimed at preventing the funding happened in December 1982. The first Bolin Amendment, which barred the use of funds for the purpose of overthrowing the government in Nicaragua or provoking a war between Nicaragua and Honduras, because they were staging a lot of the support both out of Costa Rica and Honduras. But the only one that was exposed at the time was Honduras, because the CIA, was using Honduras as a staging and training site for their GLADIO-style operations. In the joint session of Congress, President Reagan said that Congress shares both the power and the responsibility for our foreign policy. But by the time Congress exercised that shared policy by passing the Bolin Amendment 1, the Reagan administration had already committed itself to unconditionally supporting the Contras at any cost, even if it meant defying Congress. Open defiance was impossible, so they decided to use covert defiance, which was adopted by the executive branch, despite Bolin 1 having been passed. Bolin 1 left a loophole that Reagan administration quickly utilized. As long as the U.S. itself did not intend to overthrow the Nicaraguan government, the U.S. could support the Contras under the different guise, such as humanitarian aid, or by soliciting money from a third-party fund or a private actor, which is how we get to Iran and Israel. Thus, Bolin 1 had no real impact on the conduct of this covert war in Nicaragua at that current time, because they just re-justified it as something else. During the second half of 83, the CIA helped the Contras to conduct airstrikes on an airport near Managua, and in addition to other targets. The CIA used its own assets to implement some of the covert actions in Nicaragua, instead of actually pretending that they were the Contras, including destroying several fuel tanks. The CIA also placed mines in the Nicaraguan harbor, which obviously crippled their shipping. So they aren't even going to waste the time of blockading the harbor, because that would be looked at as an act of war. So instead, they just secretly mine the harbor and start blowing up ships. The Contras initially took credit for the mining, but it was later revealed by the Wall Street Journal that the mines were placed by the CIA. Furthermore, the Wall Street Journal disclosed that Lieutenant Colonel North, a U.S. Marine who had worked on the national security staff at the Reagan White House, had knowledge and encouraged the mining of the harbor. Oliver North would become an integral figure in the Iran-Contra affair. Also at this time, McFarland began meeting with Israeli counterpart David Kimchi, inquiring as to whether or not Israel would help support the Contras. The solicitation of Israel proved unsuccessful, but a few months later, McFarland, unsuccessful only in the part where they actually asked them to contribute money, and they said they weren't, but they do get involved. McFarland secured money from Saudi Arabia, though, in support of the Contras, And you have to ask, what did the Saudis get in return? McFarland would later argue that he had not solicited the funds, but simply mentioned, hey, we are having problems funding the, kind of like the beggar guy. Well, he doesn't actually ask you for money. He's got a sign and a little tin can out there. Obviously, that's what they're wanting. So McFarland was able to secure $32 million from the Saudi Arabian between 1984 and 86. North added another $2 million from Taiwan. Now, again, I keep coming back to Taiwan in so many of these stories because remember, Taiwan, why would Taiwan be involved in this? Oh gosh, isn't that where Chiang Kai-shek went with, and isn't he the biggest opium dealer in the whole world? Is he still shipping opium from Southeast Asia or Southeast Asia to Panama like he had been? I don't know, maybe, or it's his son. That's why Taiwan would want to get involved in making sure the drug trade continues. Later in 1984, some people within the Reagan administration began toying with the idea of setting up a private tax-exempt organization to raise money for the Contras, like an NGO. We're just going to solicit everybody's for money to do our covert operations. A guy by the name of Carl Chanel led this effort to secure private funds, many of the larger donors meeting with Oliver North and even President Reagan directly. Realizing the ineffectiveness of Bolin 1, Congress, still determined to stop the flow of funds, passes a second Bolin Amendment in October of 84 that says during the fiscal year 1985, no funds available to the CIA, Director, Department of Defense, or any other agency or entity of the U.S. involved in intelligence activities may be obligated or expended for the purpose of which would have the effect of supporting directly or indirectly military or paramilitary operations in Nicaragua by any nation, group, organization, movement, or individual. But, of course, there's a loophole. Here's the two loopholes that these geniuses come up with on the second Bolin Amendment. First, like the first Bolin Amendment 1, it was to solicit third-party funds from private donors or third-party countries to give money to the Contras. So they're still thinking that they can do it if it's third-party. The second loophole was to use the NSC, which is part of the presidential's principal forum for considering national security and foreign policy matters, which they argued didn't make them part of a cabinet staff or anything else. And that is what they eventually use, that they are part of the executive presidential office, the EOP. And so that naming of the State Department and Intel, because they weren't technically in the Intel, they're in the national security business, didn't apply to them. So Oliver North, who's on loan from the Marine Corps to the NSC, began undertaking this activity for President Reagan. He trusted North, and in conjunction with McFarland, they would keep the Contras funded and together. The passage of Bolin 2 led to creative means of operational support, air supply ops, and intel support via these third-party funds. So now comes the arms deals. North and others sought to provide the Contras with arms and supplies. Oliver North worked with Richard Secord, a retired Air Force general, and a guy by the name of Albert Hakim, Hakim. Interestingly enough, Albert Hakim is an Iranian businessman, and he was going to be supplying the Contras with arms. So if you take just a peek into Hakim's background, he's actually an Iranian Jewish, he's from an Iranian Jewish family. Hakim attended California Polytechnic Institute in 1955, when he went back to Iran, he established an export business specializing in advanced technologies, i.e. guns, and in avoiding export restrictions related to them. He became persona non grata in Iran after the Islamic Revolution because he was a CIA asset. Hakim moved to California in the early 1980s, and in 83, he established a group called Stanford Technology Trading Company International. And he did it with a partner, Major General Richard Secord. Subsequently became involved in the illegal covert operations to supply the Nicaraguan Contras as part of the Iran-Contra affair, because STTGI, their company, was basically a CIA front company. For his part in the matter, Hakim was charged with 5 felonies, which were all dismissed, and subsequently pleaded guilty in a plea bargain to a single misdemeanor and was sentenced in probation and a fine of $5,000. So just compare that to January 6th, right? This is an international arms dealer. So I want you to do me a favor. You have a homework assignment. I want you to take just a second and go look up Richard Secord. We're going to do a little homework. So I want to show people in real time, since we're live for the first time. I want to show people, I'm going to have to put my glasses on here. When you look through Richard Secord's history, you tell me what sticks out to you.
Let me bring this gentleman on the screen. This is the correct one, right? That I've up. Secord.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Major General, United States Air Force, notable career in covert operations, aviation detachment, Vietnam, Operation Farmgate, 2nd Vietnam left, attended Air Command and Staff College, returned to Southeast Asia, being detailed to the returned to Southeast Asia, being detailed to the Central Intelligence Agency for duty in secret war in Laos.
So he goes to Laos, and he's actually part, if you look on down there, he's the one flying the missions with the Ravens and Air America, which was all drug related. Isn't that interesting?
It very much is.
Yeah. And so you also go down, let's see. There was one other thing that I wanted to bring out. Oh, yeah. So if you go down there to 1961, where it's talking about his early training and postings, he's assigned to the 1st Air Commando Wing, which was kind of like the first iteration of special ops in the Air Force. That Adaroff guy, it says that he knew that's like the first Air Force soft guy. And look what it says. Secord was temporarily assigned to the Imperial Iranian Air Force as an advisor back in 1963 to 1964. Isn't that crazy?
It's absolutely freaking crazy.
So
and for those that, and these links will, as always, all these links that we're talking about and referencing will be down in the description, because there's even another one where it talks about a team of CIA's Hill Tribe mercenaries was inserted out of here. I mean, it just CIA.
Correct. But yet he pretends to be an Air Force 2-star. And I find this repeatedly in Operation GLADIO, right? So go on down. Returning to Washington, D.C. in 1978, Secord served at the headquarters U.S. Air Force as director of the international programs, which is weapons sales, by the way. Secord official bio states that he was a ranking U.S. Air Force officer in Operation Eagle Claw, which is the failed attempt in 1980 to get the hostages out of the Iranian embassy. However, in his autobiography, he denies he was involved with that and says he was only involved with the second one that was canceled. So he's basically just lying. And so when it says that he was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, understand that to mean that's a weapons dealer. So you have a guy that is basically a CIA agent who is running the Air Force and then the Secretary of Defense's weapons sales program.
And it says here, right below the part that you just told us about, Secord retired from the Air Force in 1983 after allegations of improper dealings with former CIA agent Edwin P. Wilson.
Oh, and who is he? Let me tell you who he is. He's the guy that was setting up in Libya all of the fake CIA companies and selling arms to Omar Gaddafi. Is that crazy?
It is unfortunately not shocking, but definitely crazy.
No, none of it's shocking. All right. So in November 1984, the three solidified their first agreement, and by the end of the following summer, over $11 million in arms were given to the Contras via private funds. A company, they also had a company called, we're going to forget about that one for just a second. 1985, North worked with Secord to build an overseas and air resupply operation for the Contras. A privately funded airstrip was built in Costa Rica in order to carry out this operation, which was functional and successfully delivering arms to the Contras by 1986. 86 marked the end of the air supply operations when an aircraft was shot down by the Sandinistas and crew member Eugene Hasenhoff was captured. This would eventually lead to the full exposure of the entire operation. And that's the one that you just mentioned. Keep in mind, Costa Rica was a CIA-installed puppet as well. Luis Alberto Magé Alvarez was Costa Rica's president. He served as Costa Rica's first ambassador to Israel in 1963 to 1966. He met his second wife, Doris, some weird name, Berger, while both were attending a luncheon in Costa Rica. She was the first Jewish First Lady of Costa Rica. She left him upon him leaving office as president. During his tour, Costa Rica declared an alignment with, quote, Western democracies, unquote, to begin to work closely with the governments of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, which at the time all had CIA, U.S. installed puppet governments. This was crucial to surviving the CIA efforts to align everyone to their way of thinking. He opted to exchange sovereignty for economic stability. He gave in to pressure from the U.S. and accepted American financial assistance in exchange for allowing the CIA to set up unofficial strategic outposts along his northern border. So, do you want to tell us how you know North?
I will. And so let me bring up a little picture of him that people can see. So here's Ollie. So, Alpha goes to war in Iraq in 2003. And I want to say somewhere probably about halfway into that. So it might have been around, I would say somewhere between maybe June or maybe like May to August, like somewhere in that window. We're on a mission. And all of a sudden we get diverted for a VIP rescue. And, we're just a bunch of scouts sitting in the back of these LAVs, right? And all of a sudden, we get to this area where we're just told that a Black Hawk's down. It had an escort of 2 Marine Cobras, and the shit's hitting the fan, right? That's what they're telling us. These pilots, they're holding it down. Cobra pilots are some bad mofos. Just gonna let everybody know.
Yes, they are.
These dudes got some brass. Let me tell you. Because you have a bunch of guys coming in. These dudes were just holding it down. And obviously the crew from the Black Hawk. And so, but we get there, bodies get thrashed. This person gets rescued. And now we're going to the rendezvous point. And on our way to the rendezvous point, now you start to hear the scuttlebutt through our headsets. And it's like, hey, we rescued Oliver North. And so now I'm a baby at the time. I'm like 20, 21, whatever my age was in 2003, 22. No, I don't think I was 22, maybe 22. But anyways, I'm a baby and I'm just like, I'm not the only Marine. I'm like, who's that? Why are you guys all excited? So got schooled really quick on who Oliver North was, because he was very respected in the Marine Corps, because kind of the as the legend was told to us, this man took one for the president, so the people couldn't, rug pull the president. That's propaganda, goes back a long way, people. and so, we get out there. And his story was he's out there doing a documentary. Got my GLADIO glasses on now. He's doing a documentary when they get shot down. Well, for those of you that know, they typically don't do documentaries over the combat sites. They stick to the areas that nothing's ever safe, but they keep film crews and people like that in certain areas. But it is Oliver North. Maybe he had some pull in why he was, or because our unit wasn't just the front lines. We're like tip of the spear, front to the front.
He was not doing a documentary. Okay.
I know, because, to be out there, to divert our unit, it means you're like in a very bad place, right? So we rescue this guy, or we rescue Oliver North, and we go out there, and, everybody's, getting a chance to, have some words with them. And I have a picture, and I will look for it. And I'm shaking hands with Oliver North in a combat zone moments after we rescued him from a firefight. And it was just, very cool to me at the time, to see this guy with this bright white hair, out there holding it down. But now I look back and I'm just like, man, we got sucked into a rescue on an op that went bad. Like that's
exactly what happened.
Happened.
Yeah. And like so many times, the military ends up in the crosshairs and we lose people for that kind of crap.
So here's the interesting thing. Like, I think I have shared it with you, our brass at the time, specifically our captain for our platoon, the dude was chasing medals. So he just volunteered us for every damn mission you could get, which gives us cool war stories now since we survived it. But at the time means we were taking more than our fair share of combat stuff out there. But we were also awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. And for those that don't know, during every campaign, the president will choose one unit for each campaign. And and this was before any of this ever unfolded, but something in me always told me that the reason we got the puck had a lot to do with that mission right there, because you don't investigate things that get awarded as heroism, because that's bad. Those are pretty things that, just everybody got medals and everybody's happy. And now we just don't talk about that stuff no more. You just wear it on your chest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you survive.
If you survive. And during that time, we did get a Rumble rant. So let me get to this one. From Tandaluz, $20 Rumble rant. Thank you very much. Thank you for all that you do. Your research is amazing. Watching these episodes, I just can't believe how we've been lied to for so many years. No wonder so many people from other countries despise the U.S. It hurts me to say that, Colonel, because I love my country, but it does make you kind of empathize on why so many people just don't like us.
So, but I'm going to push back just a little bit and say that the majority of the people in other countries don't not like Americans. They distrust our government. They distrust our government as much as we distrust our governments now. I've lived in many of these other countries. I've visited them. They actually envy Americans and our lifestyles, but they hate our government. So I do understand the sentiment, though. I wouldn't be at all surprised, but I will also tell you, I've had conversations with more than a few people that were so disgusted with us for not knowing what they already know.
You know, I'm going to bring this comment on the board, ST Spears, because I like ST Spears a lot. And the comment that she puts, Oliver North is a great guy. He came and talked at our church a couple of times. I'm not going to, it's your experience. I'm never going to take away from that. You have a positive experience with them. But I will tell you that a lot of these men, they are alphas. They have leadership capabilities. I mean, I met this man. I was a huge fan of him as well. And all I can tell you, ST Spears, is General Mattis is what breaks my heart the most in this entire thing of what we see going on in the world. Because I met that guy 2 times. I met that man 2 times in theater. Both were significant moments in my life as a Marine out there in combat. It was to the point where I would offer whatever offerings I needed to give to Mad Dog Mattis. That is this Marines love Mad Dog Mattis. But despite all those positive memories and despite everything that we know about the legend of Mattis, I also know what he did to President Trump during that administration. And we just don't get to ignore these things sometimes because we like someone so much. It kind of bleeds into that word that we know as cognitive dissonance. And so I'll just say, feel how you want, but don't prevent yourself from reevaluating things just because of the emotional attachment we have to people, because these, bad people are not supposed to look like the devil, because then we don't trust them. Bad people are supposed to be the most convincing.
So let me say something about what you just said. Hold on just a second. Let me get it over here. Oh, move. I want to read something about General Mattis. I actually met him. He was friends. There was a female general in the Air Force, and her husband she was married to a Marine. He was a retired colonel who, I don't know, had known General Mattis his entire career. So we went to dinner. If you look at General Mattis, his dad was a merchant Marine. Now, most people don't realize what merchant Marines were back in the day. They basically were like mercenaries in many respects. And he also was in Army Intel in South Africa. And he ends up working in the nuclear production business in Washington State for the Manhattan Project. And the General Mattis right now is sitting in, what's the name of the thing? The Annandale, is that it? The Annandale seat at a university that, and if you don't know, I just had a conversation. It's so funny this comes up. I just had a conversation with someone from Spain today about General Mattis, and the fact, I didn't know how these college things worked, that when they hire you to at a university to serve in a particular seat, it's like an endorsement of those people, of you, and you would have to look up what that family is, because it's a very bad family. So he basically, and a lot of people who have philosophical disagreements with people who want to sponsor them into one of those educational positions, they will refuse it because they don't agree with the philosophy of the people that are trying. It's like a marriage, almost, an academic and a sponsor, that you are agreeing to serve as their representative, which means you are not going to write anything that's contrary to what they want you to write. And you'd have to look up the entity if you're not familiar with that family, because it's not good. So anyway, it's, yeah, I definitely have changed my opinion of General Mattis. We'll see how it all plays out.
Trust me, Colonel. There's a part of me like, please just tell me you're a double agent when the story's over. Yeah, because I'm telling you, Marines, well, all service people, but Marines, I would have jumped on a grenade twice for General Mattis. Like
I know. I mean, everybody said he was always a Marine's Marine.
He 100% was a Marines. Even the way he talked, the devil dogs. I mean, it's just like,
yeah, he told people off.
yeah, he was legendary. He was the living legend. And I'm telling you, and a couple of my buddies knew, my my respect for this man. So when all the, during the Trump stuff, they were like, and I was like, look, this, I feel like I just got broken up. Like that's what I feel like in my heart right now. So let me catch us up on 2 more Rumble Rants, and I'll give it right back to you, Colonel. Gail Sieb dropping a $5 one. Aussie here. Very cool. Man, it has to be late where you're at. We all distrust our governments. It isn't just the U.S. Love to see you guys. Get Chip Tatum online. All right, let's do this. And then another one from Boom Diggity. Kathy O'Brien has a lot of firsthand testimony in her books. It covers her time being used in the Contras. And then there's a link there. Somebody wants to grab that link and share it out as well.
Okay, we ready?
We are. Let's lock.
All right. So Lieutenant Colonel North also provided a broader strategic military advice. He shared U.S. and CIA intelligence with the Contras about the location of where Nicaragua's arms and any of their strategic sites were. When private funding and the third-party governments did not provide as much support as North wanted for the Contras, I don't know how much more you need than $32 million, but whatever. North came upon the idea of overcharging Iranians for weapons sold to them by an American and using the surplus money to fund the Contras resupply operations. North wrote that what would later be infamously called the diversion memo to the new National Security Advisor, John Poindexter, and President Reagan, in which he outlined how $12 million of profit from the Secord and Hakeem deal was going to be used to supply money for the Contras. So of all of the events of the Iran-Contra affair, it was this diversion scheme that was the most controversial and explosive. Secord and Hakeem were motivated by the potential to make profit themselves, as well as engage and help the Contras. And as one reporter wrote, for all of the controversy raised about the diversion, the Contras were fortunate if they received $2 million worth of tangible benefits during the 1986 operation, an amount that paired in comparison to the $32 million that the Saudis had given. When government funding, 100% of the money gets to the beneficiary. When third parties are involved, that's not the case. So it was right about this time that Congress decides that they're going to change their position on Contra funding, because of course now 2 more Congresses has come through, and we're not, we're not prohibiting the funding of GLADIO operations with appropriated funding anymore. That's gotten very liberal. So there's a series of amendments and provisions that loosened the language of the Bolin language. And so they began qualifying for funds again. And in August 1985, Congress passed a provision that allocated $14 million directly to the Contra, but it was supposed to only be for humanitarian assistance. Later that year, and that's all a joke too, December 1985, as part of the Intelligence Authorization Act, Congress outlawed most U.S. government departments and agencies, except for State Department, from soliciting money from third-party countries to fund the Contras for humanitarian assistance only. The State Department was allowed to solicit funds provided that the money donated was from the country's own funds and that the U.S. did not enter any express or implied arrangement, basically putting us on the hook for a quid pro quo. So in 86, the Intelligence Authorization Bill allowed the CIA to provide training and intelligence to the Contras as long as it did not amount to participating in planning or executing the military or paramilitary operations or participating in logistic activities, like flying weapons around. In the summer of 1986, Congress passed a provision allocating $100 million of aid to the Contras. So you have to look back when we switch over to look a little bit about the history of Iran. Obviously, keeping at this time, a relationship with Iran was very important because it had so much oil. And for those of you who don't know, there was a guy way back when by the name of President Mossadegh, who was elected the Iranian president. And he's the one that set them up to be a democracy, a secular government. He was educating everybody. Everybody was equal. He gave women's rights to vote. He made Iran into a modern day model and they were literally a democracy. And then the CIA came in and couped him to reinstall the Shah. Why? Because Mossadegh decided in order to make all of the changes that he needed to make in Iran to make it a modern country, he was going to he asked British Petroleum, BP, who basically had monopolized their oil forever and was giving them pennies on the dollar. Like 14% of the money went to them and 86% went to London. And he said, no, I want 50-50. And London said, pound sand. They initially tried to coup him and they got thrown out of the country when it got discovered that they were going to kill him. So they went and bribed the United States to go in and try to coup him next. The CIA sends in Kermit Roosevelt, who happens to be Teddy Roosevelt's son. He orchestrates the coup, and you're never going to believe this because we're going to get another general here. A Major General Schwarzkopf, who happens to be the General Schwarzkopf that you and I know, his dad, who actually is the guy that went over to Iran to set up the SAVAK, the SAVAK, which is now kind of like their secret police or whatever. General Schwarzkopf's dad is the one that set that unit up for the Shah after they depose and arrest, and he's under house arrest for the rest of his life, Mossadegh, and reinstall the Shah in Iran. Is that crazy?
That is wild.
Yes, and that's a true story. So we've totally destabilized Iran. They go through hell with this Shah because he's a stooge. And as it turns out, guess what happens with BP? They give the Shah a 50-50 deal with the oil. They just don't have to deal with the guy they can't control. And that's what it all boils down to. That's the reason why we have the problem that we have, is because we have these people that's all about control. So,
man, it's so, I mean, you look at the spider web of these relationships, and then I'm like, I'm just curious now, like, when did we sever some of these relationships, or have they just never been severed?
I think we have. Yeah.
And this whole thing we see globally is just freaking kayfabe of just making us all think something while they're just continuing this Operation Gladio, to just enslave us the way they have.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had the illusion of freedom, but
that is what I keep coming back to.
That this is just insane. It's insane.
Okay. So obviously in the 1970s, everybody in Iran hates the Shah. He's corrupt. Everybody sees it. So they do the overthrow in 1979. That's when they had the hostages that was in the embassy. They overrun the U.S. embassy. And, you know, Ayatollah Khomeini comes to power, and he immediately severs all ties with the U.S. and declared Israel an illegitimate country. He ruled Iran as a religious leader, consolidating his power. They shifted from the U.S. Most powerful and valued ally in the Middle East to an American enemy almost overnight because of that. And supposedly we were concerned about keeping the Soviet Union out of Iran, but it really had more to do with recapturing their oil for our British overlords. But despite these efforts, the followers of the Imam and the anti-imperialist groups kind of all are, you know, machinating together. They storm our embassy. And then you have the 53 hostages that were taken, and the Iranian government, general support. It starts antagonizing not just the U.S., but during the 80s, obviously, they go to war with Iraq. And what's interesting to me about all of this is at the same time that the Iran-Iraq war was going on, and we're funding the Iraq side of it with weapons and everything else, they're working these arms deals with Iran. You have to keep that in mind. This entire thing is going on while Iran is fighting Iraq, which we're also supplying weapons to. So, and whether or not you believe in the October surprise, there's a lot of evidence to support it that basically Bush arranged these hostages to remain past the election in November to not give Jimmy Carter a win. When they had basically already negotiated their release, they basically kind of slipped them whatever in the back door, made some promises that they'd get them some weapons or whatever. And the Iranian government held the hostages over until Reagan took office, and on Inauguration Day, they released the hostages. I don't know what they got in exchange for that, but that actually happened. So Iran needs weapons, as I just articulated, for the Iraq war, because we were already giving weapons to the other side. And in the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war, the U.S. actively engaged in arms embargoes against Iran, which was called Operation Staunch. And religious fundamentalists took even more hostages beginning in 1984. It was Iran's need for weapons and the U.S.'s desire to reopen diplomatic relationships with them that led to a guy by the name of Menachem Ghorbanifar. He's another Iranian businessman working with the U.S. And guess who his buddy is? Aden Khashoggi, the world's leading arms dealer, who also basically was a cutout for the Saudis' Intel arms version of like their CIA. So this Ghorbanifar and Khashoggi are going to be the arms dealers for Iran during the Iranian-Contra affair, which I didn't even know. So they come up with a plan that would later become the Iran's arm deal. This deal would alter Iranian-American relationship and lead to the most controversial part of the Iran-Contra scandal, the diversion of funds from the sale of weapons to Iran and their supporting of the Contras. So I had to look up who this Ghorbanifar is, and he basically was an expatriate of Iran, and he belonged to the Savak in Iran that General Schwarzkopf set up. So he was part of the CIA / trained people under the previous Shah. So he means the CIA director, William Casey, believed that Ghorbanifar was an Israeli agent. He is best known as a middleman in the Iran-Contra affair. He reemerges in American politics during the lead up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq during the first term of George Bush as a back channel intelligence force in order to report on any interactions and attempts at negotiation between the Iranian officials and the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. Ghorbanifar had passed allegations to the Bush administration that, quote, enriched uranium was smuggled from Iraq into Iran and some remained hidden in Iraq, unquote, which the CIA later used as basically the justification to go attack Iraq. And the CIA also later figured out that that was all a lie. Now, Ghorbanifar was also linked, which is another interesting connection to today, to the Niger uranium forgeries, which was forged documents originally released by Italian intel that would later be used as partial justification for the Iraq war. This guy was rendered totally unreliable as part of the Iran-Contra debacle. And let me tell you why. He basically kept baiting in the Reagan administration, saying that he could get hostages released. And over 4 times, he promised, give me these missiles and I'll get hostage released. Give me these additional missiles and I'll get hostage released. Okay, well, they want all of them, which was like a total of 400. Then they got all 400 and he still didn't get any hostages released. He was totally disproven to be a unreliable source of anything. And yet they used him in the lead up to invading Iraq as some expert on dealings between Iran and Iraq when he was completely discredited 10 years before that, 20 years before that. Crazy.
I know when we finish this, it's going to be late, but I have a conversation to share with you. It's just funny how it's funny how things turn out.
The U.S. gives, okay, so Reagan is now quoted as the U.S. gives terrorists no rewards, because of course we're dealing with the hostage situation that are originating now in Iran and Lebanon at the same time. He says we make no concessions, we make no deals, while at the same time McFarlane is meeting with Israeli David Kempchi, with Khashoggi and Ghorbanifar for these arms for hostage deals while Reagan's actually saying that. So 13 days after Reagan denounced bartering with terrorists, McFarlane visited President Reagan and his chief of staff while the president was in the hospital. And some people say they think he was actually drugged during this time, that he wasn't, because he doesn't later say he remembers anything about this. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. McFarlane proposed they recently outlined arms for hostage deal. And there's a lot of details about the numbers and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into that. But know that during this time, they are basically lying to everybody on every side. But one point I do want to make, because it comes up in a lot of the reporting, the honest reporting about this time, there was a disclosure of a thing called the Enterprise. And depending on what article you read, some people interpreted the Enterprise to be an entity that the Secord guy created with that company. That's not actually what it is. The Enterprise, during Carter's administration, they fired over 1,000 CIA agents because they weren't going to do covert operations. They were going to do real diplomacy. They were going to cut off people's funds not basically bully them. They were going to try to get people like they did in Nicaragua. They cut off the funds. The guy stopped what he was doing, and then they started the funds back. So those 1,000 people were all trained CIA agents. So what they did, and it ties into another study I'm doing right now on Operation Golden Lily and using off the books gold that was recovered from the Philippines from World War II to fund covert CIA operations. They used that gold to some extent to create separate private companies that employed all of these displaced people. So basically what I'm telling you is the enterprise is a private version of the CIA, made up of front companies and people that are classified as former CIA agents doing the exact same thing they did as civil service people.
And I'm going to take that moment to interject something really, really important for those of you that are like, I want to know more about this Operation Golden Lily. Down in the description, you're going to find Colonel Towner's X, formerly known Twitter link. You're also going to find her Rumble channel. I need you guys all right now, or as soon as the show's over, go down, get the Colonel's Rumble channel, hit that subscribe button. It's free, you guys. It's free. Hit the subscribe button, and I'll give it back to you, Colonel.
Okay. Thank you. So in August of 85, there's more missiles being sent over there. And Khashoggi actually posts $1 million of his own funds to make this deal with Israel go through with Gabanafar. And there's a whole bunch of other people. Oliver North's in the middle of it. And Poindexter's, now this is about the time when he replaces McFarlane. And these missiles are going back and forth. You've got General Secord in the middle of it again, or still. And trying to get down here. We've already talked about the company that he set up. So on that shipment, there's $1 million that was basically designated for the Iran-Contra and making this whole thing come out, that was deposited in an account for Lieutenant Colonel North. Only $150,000 was ever spent on weapons. The other $850,000 was diverted to support the Contras. And so basically you've got this whole money laundering situation going on between Lieutenant Colonel North, Ghorbanifar, Richard Secord, and Aiden Khashoggi as far as the whole arms part of that. So there's another, I won't go into this in any detail. I just want to mention it. There's one huge big plane full of missiles that they're going to send through Portugal into Iran because they don't want anything going directly from Israel to Iran. And it gets stopped. They basically won't give it permission to leave until a government comes on board saying that it's approved to go. And they end up having to go back to Israel and redo the entire shipment and have a CIA cutout air, like the Civil Air Transport, the CAT line. They had several, but they had to redo the whole thing because the entire weapons, it was like 300 tow missiles all got grounded. So they just had problem after problem because, again, they're trying to do all of this stuff covertly, but not as covertly as they had in the past, where they're using, strictly CIA assets because they're using third-party cutout people and not their own weapons dealers. They're like cutting in the Aiden Khashoggis of the world into this whole thing, and Secord, because it makes it very obvious that this enterprise thing is trying to make money as well as do these side things like the Contras. So you have a Lebanese paper that breaks the story of Iran arms deal, and quickly after that, it breaks in the United States. And in December 1986, everything from the Contra affair to the diversion scheme finds its way into the press. And then you have President Reagan coming out and basically saying, you know, hey, it happened. I don't know anything about it. And then you go through all of the trials. And you have basically at the end of the day between, you know, Oliver North, I don't know if anybody else remembers that testimony. I do. I was glued to the television, and him shredding all of the paper. So that was kind of the big to do for Oliver North. It wasn't even all of the arms shipping and the illegal shit that he was doing. It was after it was all done, and you can tell our watcher who thought he sounded good when he came and spoke to her at church. He went back to his office at the National Security Council and got his secretary to come in after hours, and they shredded all of the documents that they had been using over the past several years that documented all of this, because he knew there were going to be congressional hearings and people were going to get in trouble. So they spent an entire night shredding everything. They left one document, and that was that one that we've already talked about, that basically acknowledged that it was a quid pro quo exchange to make money in order to give the money to the Contras. And that was kind of the thing that hung him up. But during the trial, or not trial, the Senate hearings, basically Poindexter is the one that took the arrow. They compared in Oliver North being in his uniform and, you know, looking handsome for the camera, and was very forthright in his answers and didn't take any crap. But you also had the juxtaposition of Poindexter, who was kind of a little dumpy, and he still was an admiral, but he didn't wear his uniform. He said, I didn't do any of this for the Navy. I did it as the National Security Advisor, and I'm not going to basically dirty my Navy uniform as such. So he showed up in civilian clothes, and he really did take the brunt of all of the backlash that happened after that. And it didn't go well for him. But the only convictions, so let's see, of the 14, 4 were convicted of felony charges, 7 pleaded guilty to either felonies or misdemeanors. 1 case was dismissed, and the 2 that were awaiting trial were pardoned by George H.W. Bush when he became president. Because throughout all of this, and although I didn't mention it a lot, George Bush, there were some people, because they knew they wanted him to be the next president, they tried to keep his name out of all of it. But there are different articles that talk about him attending meetings in Paris and in the Middle East that indicated he was very much involved in all of this. And there was, I was trying to find the one guy. There was one guy, and I'm going to go down through here just for time, that had hung out with Bush while he was the CIA director, that comes up in this story, who was intimately involved in the Iran-Contra and a slew of other CIA operations. And he basically was the conduit to Bush unofficially of all of it. So let me find his name real quick. Because when you look him up, oh shoot, I must have went by it. Maybe I still have the tab open. Hold on, let me look real quick.
Oh, don't worry. I'm telling you, Colonel, when we do our recording this weekend for the next one, I'm going to share a story with you that I'm just like, here, I'm just going to do a teaser, you guys. It's fun to do teasers from time to time. I think I came face to face with the GLADIO operative, you guys. and it's because of you'll see. I'm going to talk with the colonel this weekend because I want to run this stuff by her, get her thoughts on it. But in the end, you guys, I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm telling you guys, I think I came face to face with an operator from GLADIO, and I think they wanted me to know they were who they were. And this was not at GART. Just want to make sure it's very clear. This had nothing to do with anybody there. This has to do with the TSA little spruce thing that took place.
Holy crap. Well, now I'm excited.
So, and probably watching tonight too.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Alpha. let me pull my shades down here. I tell you what, let me know if I have any like color dots on me at all. Holy crap. I did have somebody say that to me when I was at the movie premiere about my physical security. And, it is what it is. I can take care of myself. I had a concealed carry permit from the day I got out of the military. And I'm doing God's work, and I know I am. So I'm not worried about it.
That's what I was gonna say. You're a woman of faith.
I am. So
I asked the colonel this early on, many episodes.
Yes, you did.
Because obviously I care about the colonel. She's my friend. And I was like, we need a break. And she's like, listen, doing God's mission, God's going to take care of me. And you know what? That's about as solid as you can get.
Yeah. So hold on just one second. I can't believe I can't find that.
Well, while you're searching, I'm going to take this opportunity to, let me bring this up on the screen real quick, you guys, to let you guys know, have you visit thealphawarriorshow.tv? It's above the screen majority of the time, you guys. What are you going to find there? You'll find my merchandise. You know what I mean? Got to feed the babies, keep the lights on. But in addition to that, you can see at the top, you can go to the mall or the shop. So the shop is all my merchandise. But if you guys go to the mall and you click on that, you guys know a lot about the partnerships I have with Goldco and MyPillow. But what you probably don't know is we got some mainstream people that have become affiliated with us, like Wiley X, SOG Knives. There's just, if you go through here, you got the makeup stuff for the ladies. I kind of went through it. I was like, man, that's pretty impressive. But anyways, you guys scroll through here, Brunel's, there's a G-Shock. There's just so many cool things in here. So all you got to do, there's no promo code alpha with these, but as soon as you click on that link, it automatically sends you down to where you get the special pricing. So down in the description below, thealphawarriorshow.tv, visit the mall or visit the shop. And I think the colonel is ready.
There was a guy by the name of Donald Gregg who ends up, he's involved in the Phoenix program in Saigon. And for those of you who don't know, the Phoenix program was used to basically assassinate a whole bunch of people in Vietnam. And he also was involved in Operation Condor, which is Operation GLADIO specifically for South America, to include the Chile assassination of the former ambassador in Washington, D.C. They blew up his car and killed his aide with him. And this guy is the guy that was like back channel the whole time Bush was vice president during the Iran-Contra. He's being kept advised. And there was a big controversy. The only reason I bring that up is because there was a huge controversy at the time on whether or not he knew what was going on. Well, he unequivocally knew what was going on. And he had basically his own personal CIA guy back briefing him. So I just wanted to make that point too.
You have the chat just pumped up. Like they absolutely love you and me. I get to write the coattails of the Colonel here, which is super cool. For those of you that joined late in the show and didn't catch it, we're actually live right now, which I love. So for that's how I used to always do my shows. We're live, but we've had to change it for different reasons, So now a lot of times when I do the majority of the shows, it is a show that we recorded from the weekend, but I'm present, I'm having fun with you guys in the chat. But this feels good. Like I miss this, Colonel. Like right now, our people are seeing us like real time. So when the
Right.
funny things happen, it's like, hey, that's the business of doing live. So that's
No editing.
no editing. You're hearing what you hear. I want to bring a document on the screen. While you were talking, I went and I was looking for some of the declassified documents that the CIA had revolving around the Iran-Contra affair. And I came across this one. It's a 172-page document. It's titled State Department Intelligence Community Involvement in Domestic Activities Related, and then it goes to Iran-Contra affair. Well, when I was going through it, it came up with this. I don't know what the IBC is, but I'll read it. It's just one quick section, and I'll tell you how I think it's relevant to today. And let me make this bigger so if people want to take a screenshot, make it a little easier. There we go. So page 17. I didn't do that on purpose, you guys. I just noticed that. I was like, let me tell everybody what page we're on. It things just work out the way they do. So page 17, bullet point 6, classification of fiscal year 1986 contract S/LPD classified its final $276,000 contract with IBC as secret, contending to officials that it contained sensitive information of a national security nature. However, the contract was virtually a continuation of unclassified fiscal year 1985 contract, except for the addition of unclassified document distribution system. The OIG's report concluded that, quote, there was nothing of national security or even a sensitive nature in the contract, in our opinion. The real reason for classification was to avoid publication in the CBD and possible challenges to the sole source contractual relationship with IBC, end of quote. So I was kind of curious if maybe you knew what the IBC was with regards to the Iran-Contra thing.
Well, basically, let me see something real quick. Basically what they're saying there, I mean, the only IBC that I'm aware of is a bank. And that would make sense if they're money laundering, that they would have a bank involved in this. And the controversy that they're talking about, I don't know if people understand that. So sole source in government contracting, you are not allowed to issue sole source contracts unless you have a valid reason to do that. And sole source means I'm telling you who I'm contracting with. I'm not sending it out for bids. And so anytime that you're a government, like an officer, I had like my last job, $122 million. When I contracted services, I had to send those out for bid. However, if, for example, like if I wanted, because of my job, I had to travel so much, most of the contracted telephone services, like for cell phone services, in the areas that I traveled the most to, Verizon was the only one that had the service that ensured my phones were never dropped. And so we could do a sole source based on that documentation as long as we were able to justify. And I did. I had whole conversation, all of my, because AT&T was like the preferred carrier where we were at, but you couldn't drive anywhere in central Georgia and stay on a phone call. It dropped repeatedly. And so you can then issue a sole source contract. So what this is saying, you have to have justification. They're saying that they classified the contract in order because they had no justification to make it sole source. And IBC is a bank. And so they are basically issuing a contract to have that bank perform services And it may have been the bank where they were depositing those excess funds to pay Secord's group or company, front company for the CIA. There's so many banks involved in all of this money laundering, because everything, and we didn't even go into that, but everything we just talked about, all of that money flowing flows through banks. And the money that is like on Golden Lily that is laundered through on the black market, that has to go through at least 2 or 3 banks in order for it to come out the other side of it clean, and usually through another company. So they'll run it through a company, like they buy restaurants and or cash products like nurseries. They'll buy a business like a landscaping thing where you have lots of dead plants or whatever. And that's how they money launder the real estate. Anything where they can buy products and make it and then sell it right away so that they can clean the money out on the other side, then they can go deposit it in a bank and spend it for their weapons deals.
It's just, that's why I wanted to ask you. I knew you'd make it make so much more sense, because I look at I look at this, and this wasn't declassified until November 2nd of 2012. You're talking about 30 years or more, Marine Corps math, everybody, before this gets declassified. And the other thing that made me take pause to this particular section was the fact that they were classifying it, and the OIG at the time saying, well, we're just thinking you're just trying to conceal what's going to get you caught. And over the last few days, you've seen that with the judge that unsealed some of the things around Trump's paperwork. And what do you see when you go through these documents? Because when you seal things, especially with regards to, local law enforcement that we're seeing in Trump's case, you're sealing to protect ongoing information. You're sealing to protect informants. There's very specific things that you're sealing for. And when you read through what they sealed, no, the only reason they sealed the information they did was because it revealed the narrative of what they were trying to do.
Exactly.
Like that is criminal.
So
but they've been doing it since here, and I'm sure before then.
I have said repeatedly, Tucker, that's one of his favorite comments, is that there's over 40 billion pieces of paper classified. They have an entire, I don't know if people know this, but in Maryland, across from Andrews Air Force Base and down the turnpike a little bit, they have an underground facility that has 40 billion pieces of paper in it that's classified. And those types of, so my big problem with that is they love throwing the word democracy around. How do you have a democracy with 40 billion pieces of paper of classified information that you think me as a citizen I'm not entitled to see it? I'm not entitled to know what my government's doing in my name. 75 years in some cases. And that can't be in a democracy. I know we don't have a democracy. I know it's a republic, but you can't even pretend it's a democracy when you have 40 billion pieces of paper that you are hiding from me for no apparent reason, because everybody's dead.
And the part that worries me is if laws were changed to reveal those 40 billion documents, there would probably be some type of natural disaster that would probably destroy the location where all those things are. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree.
So, do we have anything more for this, Colonel?
We're done.
So we'll do this, you guys. One, the Colonel's a trooper because she's on the East Coast. So for me, it's only 8:19. It's 11:19 for Colonel. I think my math's right on that. 11:19. So we will bypass on the comments from the last show. We'll just double up on the next one when we do the recording. But I do want to take this time, Colonel, to just let you know from what I heard at GART firsthand from people, what I see in my DMs and the emails is just the people love you, they respect you, and there's so many people that you're never going to get to meet and hug and see face to face that are just in your corner. So just know that the world of good people is praying for you, and we're thankful. I speak on behalf of everybody We are so thankful for the grueling hours that you put into doing what you do. So, I wanted to share that. And if you have anything to say before we call it a night, the mic is yours.
Just thank you. Thank you for giving me the platform to do it all on. I really appreciate it.
Well, there you guys have it. Do me a solid, you guys. Down in the description, you have the links to find Colonel Towner on X, formerly Twitter. You have the links to go to her Rumble channel. If you guys truly support her the way you tell me you do, you need to go, you need to hit subscribe. It's free. And then after that, share it, share it, share it. And then we are just going to push for the next movie to be on Operation Gladio, starring yours truly over there. You guys, with that, this is the Alpha Warrior Show, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Tomorrow, you guys can catch me on Badlands at Roll Call at 6 p.m. Eastern and on SitRep at 9 p.m. Eastern. I think my times are right on that. If not, you'll find me in the trenches of this information war on X. So I'll see you guys next time. God bless everybody. Have a good night.
I'm excited to announce we're having a huge MyPillow spring sale, and here's a few examples. Buy one of our MyPillow 2.0s, you get another MyPillow 2.0 absolutely free. Made with cooling technology, the best pillow ever just got even better. And this just in, 9 brand new colors and styles of our Percale bed sheets. They're made with the finest long staple cotton, and now you can save 50% or more. That's as low as $24.98. And for the first time this year, I'm bringing you our My Slippers and Sandals for as low as $25 a pair. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get your MyPillow 2.0s. Buy one, get one free. Percale sheets as low as $24.98. My Slippers and Sandals as low as $25 a pair. And for a limited time, when you order $75 or more, your entire order ships absolutely free.